So here's my love poem to silage to get us started. Oh, sweet, sweet silage. It is now that I will speak of it, a sparkling critique of it, the covered-up mystique of it, the flavour so unique of it, the strong and cocky cheek of it. The farmers' hands, they reek of it. It stays with them for weeks of it. Their wives, they have to sleep with it. The heifers, they would leap for it with a missionary zeal for it. The all-day steaming meal of it, the sleek and textured feel of it, the polythene thin seal of it, the language-forming spiel of it, the hunger-storming heat of it, the winter-warming beat of it, the chance to overeat of it, the ritual repeat of it, the scientific feat of it, the engineering skill of it, the building up a hill of it, the thrilling, pleasing ooh of it, the spilling, squeezing spew of it, the bovine teasing brew of it, the taste bud puzzle stew of it, the snappy guzzle chew of it, the happy muzzles moo of it, the love fermenting woo of it, the lovely smelly shoots of it, the swollen belly fruits of it. I'd fill my welly boots with it, the gorgeous pungent juice of it, the words are so effuse in it, the wonderful excuse of it, the everlasting use of it. All veggies could have fun with it. Hell, they could eat a ton of it and still be never done with it. The stunning luscious vein of it, the summer sun or rain of it, the there forever stain of it, the seeping down the drain of it, the milk production gain of it, the Frisians that are fed on it, the gaudy green and red of it. I'd even make my bed in it. Enjoy the sweet caress of it and not think any less of it, the sharing out success of it, the feast for any guest of it. The old cows get the best of it, the young beets eat the rest of it, the fabulous bequest of it, the treasured full-blown breath of it, the rising after death of it, sweet resurrection of grass. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. So, welcome to this Farmer's Journey session. I'm going to be chairing this session. I'm a soil scientist. I work at an environmental charity called FIDRA, and I can tell you more about that later, or you can come and find our table in the exhibition tent. But this session's all about learning the lessons, learning about the lessons that our free farmers that have been kind enough to agree to be panel members for this session. We want to hear what stories they can tell, and I'll just quickly introduce each of them briefly for those of you that maybe don't know them. So we've got David Aglen. He's a farm manager at Balbirnie Home Farm, and he manages 1,200 hectares of mixed farm with 800 hectares of arable crops and 200 cows, and he uses diverse rotations, and his key focus areas are soil health, plant health, reduced inputs. And then we have Elisabeth Massie, who runs a mixed arable and livestock enterprise in East Lothian. And she tells us she's got a good level of biodiversity, so it'd be good to hear a bit more about that. And she's also keen on trying out different compost methods. And we also have Doug Christie, who farms 540 hectares in Leithen. A third is run organically on livestock, and it's based on rotation, where mob grazing is implemented. And the other 2/3 of the farm is under arable rotation, where regenerative farming practices are increasingly being used. So over the last 20 years, so perhaps one of the most experienced farmers with regenerative agriculture that we have here today. So just to kick things off, I'm going to ask the first question. And Doug, if you don't mind me asking you, what advice would you give to farmers that are considering adopting new regenerative farming practices? Do you have any key messages to those new entrants?
20 years ago, 25 years ago, I started going down into the dark side of it, and maybe not seen as the dark side anymore. But one thing I do suggest anyone wanting to go down the direct drilling route or putting cover crops in is go to other farmers, speak to other farmers, and see how they're doing it. Because I didn't have all, it's becoming a bit more mainstream now. those sort of things. So I didn't have those peers or other farmers to go to and ask. And you've really got to ask farmers at the end of the day. Surely it should be a farmer-driven movement, and primarily, okay, we've got to go a bit with science, but that's what I'd suggest. Go to organisations like BASE or Pasture-Fed Livestock Association. On AHDB are doing a lot now. So, because I wouldn't want anyone making mistakes that I made, and I've made a lot of mistakes over the years. But if you can short circuit those mistakes, it would be a good thing going forward.
Great. And Elisabeth or David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
My husband would probably just say, just go for it, just try it. I would probably say, try a wee bit first. Do your research. Certainly speak to other farmers. There's lots of information out there. Lots of people have tried things. One thing I've started doing this year is doing windowsill trials. People talk about tramline trials, which are this big, plot trials, wee plot trials, pot trials. But I've tried windowsill trials this year, and that's been really, really interesting. A very quick result in if you think something will make a difference or not. So I would just say, yes, speak to lots of other people, but just try something. It could be big or small, but small is probably safer. Yes.
Yeah. That's good. And David, what about you?
Yeah, I just want to say Jim's poem, really good. That should be on the college syllabus for silage, I think. Students would learn a lot reading that. Summed it all up. Exactly as Doug and Elisabeth said, I think also don't be frightened to fail. And I don't mean fail on a grand scale that your business is going to suffer, but don't be frightened to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Even those of us that are farming conventionally still make mistakes. But don't be frightened to own the mistakes and learn from them. I find you don't learn anything by doing things right all the time. You always learn when something goes wrong, and that's really, really important.
Mm-hmm. But do you feel that everybody's got that luxury of taking the risk and trying things?
It doesn't have to be a luxury. You can make a mistake. You can plan a mistake, which sounds an odd thing to say, on the scale that suits you. So if you can afford to lose £50 on a trial and it won't kill you, just spend the £50. If you can afford 50,000, well, go for it. So just adjust it to what you can do.
And let it be farmer-led.
Oh, absolutely. That's hugely important,
So, sorry,
Can I
Doug.
just add a point? Again, one year I just decided to leave 6 metres on a wheat field unsprayed. And I thought, I've got the Holy Grail. I've been doing this stuff for decades, and the soil should be able to, this wheat crop should be free of disease if I don't spray it. Anyway, it killed it off without spraying it. I just showed and it was 6 metres. I think I lost 2 tons per hectare on that bit that I didn't spray. Eventually I went in with a head spray. I think it was yellow rust that came in. But go cautiously. Don't think you can move the world in a day like I did or have done in the past.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I would like to open the questions up to the audience. So does anybody have any questions at all for any of our panel farmers?
Gosh.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So man there in the cap.
Are we ever going to get rid of glyphosate?
Oh. Right.
There's always one.
Hands up if you want to answer that one. Yeah.
Yeah, we do rely on it heavily. We have conversations next door at Balburney about going organic every year, and we haven't done it yet, but I think it's getting closer. What sticks in my head at the minute is that I hate soil erosion more than I hate glyphosate. But interestingly, if you have a room of farmers like we have here, and people say, well, how are you going to manage without glyphosate? I return the question, because all of our neighbours, not all of them, but by and large, most of them still farm conventionally, and they all still plaster the farm in glyphosate. So the whole industry, bar organic, seems dependent on it. We'll just have to find a way. If it gets banned, there will be a solution. It might be more chemicals for some people, it might be organic for others, and there will be a shift, and it'll just happen, as it were. I don't know what the economics of that will turn out to be in the long run, but that's what will happen. It's a good question, and it's got to be faced up to.
The Republic of Ireland have now insisted that glyphosate is only used as a post-harvest spray. Should we not be doing the same?
It probably depends on your context. It's certainly the way that we apply it on our farm. I don't want to use it, but I'm struggling to integrate how I destroy cover crops before the next crop, or if I've messed up with my weed control, how do I control weeds? I don't want to use it, but I either spray glyphosate or take the plough out, or cultivate several times. So it's a judgment on where we go. I don't agree with, and I'm going to be controversial here, and I apologize, I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't want to spray things before they're cut. I know some people have situations where they have to get the combine through the crop, but as a general thing to ripen them off, that doesn't sit well with me at all.
And Doug, did you want to add anything as well on glyphosate?
I use the evil stuff as well, but everything, glyphosate's the most used chemical in the world, and the spotlights on glyphosate, I don't particularly want. It's where there's a will, there's a way. Not being able to use it, and I use a bit, but there are other chemicals there, maybe worse for the environment, a higher half-life, more persistent in the soil. So I use it as a tool, and to be able to not plough, which I think that what's the lesser of the two evils at the end of the day? I don't know. Half a litre of glyphosate a hectare, or inverting how many 20,000 cubic meters of soil a hectare. I can't remember how it is if you plough it 8 inches times 100 times 100. Anyway, I don't know. But the other thing is, and I think there's an opportunity possibly for bringing cattle and perennials back into the rotations further down the line, but they've got to pay. Cattle price is reasonably good now, but there's nothing wrong. Regenerative is the buzzword now, but there's nothing really wrong with a traditional mixed farm at the end of the day. You can't really fault it. And if you're mixed farm with 3 or 4 years of perennials in the crop and you clear up, I've had an issue with the conventional part of the farm with some grass weeds and even hogweed. And in a couple of years of a perennial crop, those disappear, and especially using livestock. So I think livestock have got a big part to play in the equation as well, within an arable rotation. Because you can't rely, East Anglia, a lot of fields, or even some parts of my farm hadn't had livestock on for about 40 years, and you could really see it, and it gives an opportunity maybe for increased organic matter on the farm. Having a perennial using livestock.
Yeah. And would you say for farmers that want to increase their soil carbon, is it easy enough to get hold of manures and organic fertilizers if they haven't got a mixed farm themselves, if they don't have that supply of organic input?
It's tricky. Is there enough to go about? Isn't for every farm to use compost or farmyard manure. But you need the cattle in sheds to get the farmyard manure, and I want my cattle outside all year round. So,
and
it's a tricky one. But surely you could do it through roots. Photosynthesis puts carbon into the soil, probably more so than trash and organic matter.
So vegetation cover is the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Protecting your carbon. And the environmental charity that I work for, we're against the contaminants found in organic fertilizers such as sewage sludge or biosolids. So that's another area that we need to try and tackle. We're trying to make sure that we're using clean resources and that we've got high quality materials available for high quality food production and healthy soils. Does anybody else have any questions at all for our panel? So, yes.
I just want to ask about entry into farming. So I just want to acknowledge that in the last session, every community garden in a city, every urban farm is a place which is the future workforce, because we're going to need to produce more food in Scotland, whether we like it or not, and that direction of travel. So but I'm curious also about the entry into farming in rural areas, because we've got some of the most unequal land ownership in Europe, and in fact on the planet. My father paid off the farm when I was a wee girl to Lord Brookborough, for 30 acres. And 100 years ago in Ireland, we had redistribution of lands. Lots of people had a way of getting 30 acres and you could start in farming. I'm curious about your experience of young farmers getting into farming and how we can help that, because this is such an audience of people who would love to be, even just managing a raised bed to start, actually, if it's in a city environment, but in rural areas, producing substantial food for Scotland. So your experience, or what you would like to see happen for entry into farming.
And I guess this touches on education as a key thing. Do any of you have any strong thoughts on this, David?
I'm farm manager. Is this working?
Yeah.
I'm farm manager next. Sorry?
Is it not working?
I'll try and speak up. I'm the farm manager next door at Balburney Home Farm, so I don't have any ownership stake in the business that I manage. But what we do, what we are part of at the minute, is we have an agreement currently with a young couple who have a flock of sheep. Now, we currently pay them a fee annually to manage our cow herd, in line with our requirements and expectations, and in return for that they get a discounted rate on grazing and access to up to 1,200 acres of land. Now, some of that land is in arable cropping, so they can graze winter cereals in the winter and cover crops in the winter. A good chunk of it is in grass, some of it's temporary grasslays, some of it's good old pastures, and some on the hill up behind us. So that's allowed them access to a large landscape to build a business from, and they can go out and about and collaborate with other neighbours around if they wish to build their own business whilst having the security of a base at Balburney. That's one way in for people who don't have, because let's face it, you cannot afford to go and borrow money to buy land and make a living of it. That reality hasn't existed for an awful long time now. So other ways are share farming. I think there's more of an understanding with some landowners now that realise the point you're making, that they've got the key to this, they've got the land ownership for various reasons, be they personal or financial or whatnot. They don't want to give the land away. They don't want to get involved in tenancies nowadays, because that effectively can have a similar impact in the long term. So they've maybe got the land but don't have the knowledge and the expertise, so they're looking for people to come in, and there are people around the country, some of them may be here, who have share farming agreements. They maybe own the livestock but they need the land. And so there are, for those that are broad-minded enough to go and look for the opportunities, I think there are more opportunities now for young people to get in, because my goodness, the industry needs them, because a lot of us here are getting older and we're looking behind us and there's really nobody coming behind us to kind of fill the gap. So yeah, I think opportunities do exist. Maybe it's for the colleges to point out these opportunities, or us as an industry to advertise these opportunities a bit more.
Mm-hmm. And take on apprenticeships, perhaps. Have you ever had any experiences? Yeah.
I haven't, no.
Okay. Would you like to come in at all, Elisabeth or Doug?
Yes, I suppose I take a slightly different angle to it, in that tradition of working with young people and trying to empower the young people with lots of skill and experiences, and I try and do that as much as I can. There was I tell you a daft wee story maybe. I got a phone call 2 weeks ago from a mother saying, my children think your cattle have got out in the village. So, will I go and check if they're your cattle? I went, no, I'll come down. And when I got to the play park, there was 2 children on top of the climbing frame in safety away from these cattle. And they told me exactly which cattle it was, exactly where they were, and can we come and help? So I went, okay, right, that's fine. So what had happened over the period is, when we'd put these cattle in the fields, we've taken our fields back from being rented out, and we've put our own livestock into them. So these children had made friends with these cattle through the gate. and they decided that Sticky Willies, I think that's cleavers, but Sticky Willies, they'd been feeding them Sticky Willies through the gate. So they knew what these cattle liked to eat, and the cattle knew them. So when we decided to relocate them into a neighbouring field, the cattle knew the children, they knew them, and it was a very smooth process. You know, there was no waving batons or expletives or anything else. So I made up 2 wee certificates for these 2 kids and put it into the local school, and the school made a big deal of it. And I was like, oh, but I wanted the community to realise that because of the curiosity of these children. And I hope my very small part, and encourage them to take part in what we were doing. They were learning about animals and learning about the community, and I think that's what brings everything together. My father, he always was keen to take on students and young people, you know, maybe looking for a first job or something on the farm, and to come and learn. Hopefully, not break too many things, but certainly I think educating and engaging with communities and food eaters is certainly the way forward, yes.
Okay. And Doug?
I don't have much to say, but as encouragement at school, I think maybe farming is, you know, traditionally seen at school. Maybe it's off the agenda. Maybe it's more on the agenda now with RET taking groups of farm children round farms. But I had a couple of French students for 2 years in a row at calving time, and they were only 16, the first time they'd been away from France, and they spent from the age of 12 onwards at agricultural college 2 days, 2 weeks in the college, and then another 3 weeks out on a farm. And their experience at the age of 16 on farm was phenomenal. You know, I could have let them get on for the rest of calving without even being present. Absolutely amazing guys, and they'd perhaps been brought up on the farms. They come from farming families originally, but trying to encourage more people onto the land, it's tricky, but it's not impossible. Where there's a will, there's a way, by whatever means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there's definite need for more connectivity with the land. And Celine, I think you had a question, and then I'll go to you as well. Apologies, hi. I didn't see.
Hi, my name is Maureen from the University of Exeter. So I'm coming from a circular economy perspective, which basically covers practices that minimize pollution or maximize value extraction or regenerate nature. And my question would be to our 3 farmers, 2 parts. First would be, did you at any point actually have to sort of transition your farming practices? And if you did, what were the key factors that influenced that decision to transition?
Okay. Doug, would you like to go first there?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was what made me change, and what was the transition?
Yes. What made you change?
Into
yes.
regenerative or conservation agricultural practices.
Yeah.
It was a while ago, the late 90s, and I was fed up with going up and down a field with a 3-furrow reversible Perker point plough. It took quite a long time to do a 45-acre field, probably 3 days, I think, and I'm sure. And then we had an Australian helping out with the kids, and I sent her rolling in one night with a torch, because the lights of the tractor didn't work with a torch, so she had to see where she was going with a torch. And she came to me, and she'd lost her rag, really. She was quite upset. And she said, "What the hell are you doing, spending 3 days ploughing and then 3 days sowing a 45-acre field?" And I suddenly, that sort of hit home, and maybe I'm doing something wrong. So that's what made me sort of change. It was mainly a cost-saving exercise with fuel, and so on. You could get across the land quicker with direct drilling and minimum tilling. But that was the start of it. The start of going down that.
And I'm guessing circular economy wasn't really a buzzword back then, was it? But now it's always
No,
been
and trying to make them more. I don't like writing checks too much. And I like receiving them, but not writing them. And it really didn't, production fell down. Production did go down a bit. I made some stupid mistakes, like I had a field of winter barley, which was huge amounts of straw, and I thought, well, I'll just chop the straw because you're supposed to put the straw back into the land and so on. So I chopped the straw with the combine and went straight in with a direct drill to sow winter oilseed rape. And needless to say, it didn't work too well. Didn't work well at all, really.
Okay. Never done that again.
I haven't done it again. No, you learn from your mistakes, as David was saying.
So, Elisabeth, do you have any words of wisdom in terms of why and when you kind of started adopting regenerative agricultural practices?
I'm not sure there are words of wisdom, but I can certainly tell you my story. I think, looking back, it started in lockdown when we were thinking we needed to make a better job of making compost for the garden because we were going to put in some more strawberries because you had to produce what you needed at home pretty much and not go anywhere. And then I discovered Elaine Ingham, and then she reminded me how to use a microscope, and then Jings that grew arms and legs. So then I started looking at the compost that we were making, what was the life in it, what was the life in our barley field, our grass field in year 4, what was on the side of the field, what was in the wood, what was all the soil like. And I was astonished what I discovered from that. So that really started me thinking, understand about this whole thing. I did go down to Groundswell in 2021 and yeah, discovered lots of things, came home and thought, yeah, I'm going to make lots of compost. I think some of the gentlemen in the crowd here stood over the dike wondering what I was doing, getting my neighbour in his big self-propelled chopper to come down and chop my straw into trailers. They were very confused. But my other neighbour was bringing me slurry and we mixed some grass, some straw and some slurry in together and made this wonderful compost. So I think this is the way forward, this is good. And then, of course, I counted up all the diesel that had been burned in making this compost and went, what are we doing? What are we doing? So I think there's a compost thing later on, which I'll maybe talk more about the compost that we're making now. But trying to, I think my greatest, I have lots of joyful things that have come out of this transition. Nobody was telling me I had to do this, but I just understood it was a better way to farm. It would probably, like Doug, reduce my costs. We haven't put any fertiliser on grass for 4 years. Why would you? We managed to grow a fantastic cover crop in one field 1 year. We have grown since, and I was able to direct drill spring barley into it. And people say you can't direct drill spring barley. Oh yeah, you can. And we had the best yield we've ever had out of a field of spring barley. It doesn't always work out like that, but it was just like, wow, this does work, and it cost me a fraction of what it did to produce. We've managed to have a circular economy in lots of our enterprises now on the farm, and that gives me enormous pleasure. Being able to do that, produce what we need on farm, and recycle things out the back end, the beasties right on the farm, and use it all. That I think we're just going back to how things were done before, and it certainly is a very happy and a very profitable way for us to farm, certainly.
Great, that's a good success story. Thanks. And David, what would you like to answer that same question about when and why?
I started in 2004 with taking a. Is this working?
No.
I started in 2000. In 2004, took a job as a farm manager down in East Anglia in Suffolk, and shortly discovered a machine that could go into a stubble field and plant a crop and in one pass, and I thought this was magical. It wasn't called conservation ag, or it didn't have a title back then, I don't think. It was just weird farming, and that's what the neighbours thought. Anyway, we kind of made a success of that, and then 6 years later moved back up to Scotland, and we were battering soils around with power harrows and 300 horsepower tractors and goodness knows what. And then we had 2011, which was the wettest year in history, and then we had the 2012, which was the wettest year, even wetter than 2011. And we just watched soil running out of gateways, and it was a real ordeal to get crops established. And just thought, well, we need to change. We need to do something. And we started looking at direct drilling then, just as a way of moving soil less. And even that was an anathema to some people. You know, what on earth do you want to try a direct drill in Scotland for? But we got there. And our soils have improved. We're still beating soils around a bit with vegetable production and things like that. That's the one thing we haven't quite solved. How can we economically grow root crops without moving a lot of soil? We've scaled back root crop production on the farm. It's now 50% of what it was 10 years ago, and we've had to kind of adjust for the economics of that. And we're still learning. We're now on a trip towards possibly organic in the future. Certainly we're using less pesticides. That kind of came about the realization that nature is beating us. We can apply herbicides and fungicides and insecticides till the cows come home, but nature is always getting more and more resistant. And that happens very quickly. If a new fungicide comes out, within 2 or 3 years there's resistance on farm by the time we get access to it. So within 5 or 6 years, they're kind of ineffective almost. So it's can we find a different way, biological ways. The idea of using nutrition to keep plants healthy, that was Joel Williams, who I think is maybe creeping around at the back there, is he? Hiding under his cap. Who I think you're speaking tomorrow, Joel, are you? Joel's got a lot of stuff online. If you get a chance to get a one-on-one with him, I would do. He teaches you a lot. He's got much more time to read through papers and educational stuff than I have. And he managed to distill it down. There's many other good orators around the world, and YouTube and the internet is a great source of information. So we're still changing, and we're kind of going along the similar route to Elisabeth now. We've realised that at Balbirnie we need a lot more livestock. Go back to the 70s, and the farm was smaller. The in-hand operation was smaller than it is now, and they had 1,200 head of cattle on the farm. So there was slurry, there was dung, there was all sorts. Now we've got a bigger farm, and we've only got 200 or 300 head. So we need more livestock. We need to build the fertility and the resilience back into the soil, and that's where we're heading next. Sorry, Jim. Need to get the cows back.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the gentleman down here, I believe, is next. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not a farmer, but I've had a lifelong interest in farming, and I'm a biologist. And I want to ask some basic questions, and maybe the easiest way is just to ask two. One is, what happens, and can you get away with mulching instead of glyphosate? And the other is about glyphosate. It poisons earthworms, and that wrecks your soil. If you've poisoned the earthworms, you've had it. So I think, for me, glyphosate is forbidden land. And I'd just like some more comments. But I've got lots more to say, but that will do.
Yeah, we can talk to you afterwards. Thank you. So mulching, have you tried mulching techniques at all, any of you?
Well, one of the principles, if you'd like to put it, of regenerative agriculture is keep the soil covered the whole time. So there's no bare soil. You don't want bare soil. It's not good. Okay, it does harbour slugs and so on, but and crimper rolling or if you're growing a cover crop over the winter and manage to roll it or not desiccate it but drill into that, then the process of doing that can actually cover the soil between the rows of seed you're putting in. So that does help, but it all depends on is killing the crop. So if I've got a rye cover crop in over the winter, really it's got to be just about the milky ripe stage if you're crimper rolling it to be able to kill it, because otherwise it will just bounce back again. But that stage, it's the middle of June, and it's far too late to grow most crops. To sow most crops, but it was trial and error, and I'm sure there'll be a way of doing it more, doing more of it. But glyphosate is a big, a love-hate relationship with it a bit on the farm. I understand what you're saying, but there's possibly evidence to show that intensive tillage could have more of an effect. I don't want to defend glyphosate, for Christ's sake, but intensive tillage can have more of a detrimental effect on earthworms, and especially the larger ones going down the soil profile than judicious use of glyphosate. What a word.
Yeah, it's those deep burrowing earthworms that we need to look after. Does anybody else have any comments on the mulching as a solution?
Just quickly on the glyphosate one, we've more earthworms now since we stopped ploughing than we did beforehand because we're not moving the soil. So I don't doubt that they damage the earthworms, but it's like I said before, I hate moving soil more than I hate glyphosate. I don't particularly like glyphosate, but at the minute it's a necessary evil. On the mulching side, I've been looking at this recently with a view to trying stuff on the farm maybe next year. Doug pointed out exactly, by the time the crop needs to be kind of at a relatively mature growth stage before crimping and mulching works, because otherwise it doesn't die and it grows back. Unfortunately, particularly in the springtime, the varieties of oats and barley, etc., that we grow, by the time these crops are mature enough to crimp successfully and get a mulch which will control weeds, which will potentially do without the glyphosate, it's too late to economically plant the varieties we've got. One thing I have been wondering is whether we can import some shorter season varieties, say from Canada, etc., which are used to growing from seed to harvest in 90 to 100 days. Could we delay the sowing till middle of May, when you might get some of these species to be crimpable, and still get an economic output in August or September? That's one thing breeding in this country's gone, yield is what's got varieties forward, and the way to get yield is to have them in the ground longer, which ultimately has meant sowing them earlier. And so that kind of works against the mulching notion at the minute, but I think there could be a good outcome. Some of these guys in the States manage it where they've got later sowing opportunities. They can mulch down their cover crop, get the weed suppression, and get the new plant growing, and it works quite well. So,
or even growing intercropping, sort of having lines of your main cash crop and then growing another crop in between, like, for example, clovers or whatever it is, and even mulching them with small crimper rollers between the lines of the mainly corn or wide row crops, and that seems to be reasonably successful. But it does keep the soil covered all the time, and it does create an environment where seeds can't, struggle to germinate. Mm-hmm. Weed seeds.
I think we will find the answer. We just haven't got it yet.
Mm-hmm. At least it's good to hear that you're learning from other countries. Okay. Oh, Celine, could we get a microphone to Celine?
Thank you very much. You talked about your transition, and you also talked about trying stuff in filling. So how would you like the government to support farmers that are not doing that themselves just now?
It's a very good question. So I guess, what can the government do to help protect the farm business?
The golden egg, yes. It's encouraging people to have a go, and there's a risk. If you're trying things on a very small scale, you have confidence. If the government are keen for us to roll this out on a grand scale across all our farms, it's that transition period till you're confident and you know what you're doing. There's that risk where you can get it wrong. I've got it wrong. I think we've all got it wrong at times, just because we don't quite understand what's going on. You learn very fast, very quickly. I think it's that transitional period that you need some support, because if you're not getting it right, you're at financial risk, and that's what it boils down to.
And it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, is it? Because all the soils vary across Scotland, and the cropping systems, the climate. So it's not an easy thing to try and simplify. For the government need to do this and provide this support for agriculture. But that's just my opinion. But what do you think? Is there a clear ask of government?
Naively, perhaps, and I don't mind admitting that, I'd like to think that we should need government support. Can we make it work? And the farming industry can drive things forward itself, rather than always be cap in hand, as it feels like, for government. I mean, that, it's maybe a long way away, and it goes back to the last discussion in here that was about, cheap food, not keeping food economically available for people and things like that. So it's a tricky one. It'd be nice if we could do it without and that's, I suppose, goes back to my original point about try what you can afford to try, but also Doug's point about speaking to your neighbours and your peers around about who've tripped over 5 times. We'll go and learn how to avoid those hiccups and get straight to the further up the line without the failure.
Doug, did you want to come in at all? Like, what do you think about the grant schemes?
Well, I think,
for
I think
example?
perhaps going down to a more sort of farming with nature type of farming, you've got to use it to your benefit as a farmer. There's opportunities there. So rather than having your hand out to government, or you want to make your farm a more resilient business going down the road. But maybe farmers do need a bit of help, like, for example, the organic conversion periods and a similar sort of thing for going down a no-tilling or cover cropping situation. I'm not saying no-tilling is the answer at all in any stretch of the imagination. If you're ploughing once every 3 or 4 years, probably not such a big issue. But cover crops have certainly got a big space. So you're growing a spring barley crop for half the year, and it's sown in April and harvested in September. The sunlight for the rest of the year, and it's not being used. I would like a crop in that field for the rest of the year to be able to harness that sunlight, and it can bring in a lot of other ecosystem functions like diffuse pollution and soil erosion and runoff, and also biodiversity. It helps a lot with biodiversity, but there is a bit of push and pull, maybe a bit of encouragement for the government at the end of the day, but I'm sure they've got a lot more money. They've got a lot more things to spend their money on, like the health services as well. But that brings it around again to nutritious food, producing nutritious food, nutrient-dense food at the end of the day. I get completely wrapped up in knots thinking about it all sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And with cover crops, you have to get them established, don't you? You have to make sure that you get them in the ground in time, and otherwise you won't get all those benefits if it's a failed cover crop.
Well, that's another challenge in Scotland in its own right, isn't it? But again, just like I said to the gentleman before, we'll find a way.
Yeah, and learning from others. And education has come up a lot at the moment. So David, you said that you used YouTube and, contacts people that have got the time to read papers and provide advice.
Yeah, there's good organisations out there like BASE, Biology, Agriculture, Soil and Environment, we're a farmer member organisation that we can share ideas amongst ourselves, and you can learn from people all up and down the country. It's a good help, and just local groups that, just to say, it's speaking to your peers round about, and sometimes you'll show them something terrible and somebody will come up with a good idea how to solve the problem, or they're good experiences that you can get the information for free.
Yeah, and the government has schemes for facilitating that sharing of knowledge, doesn't it? So,
and even getting a couple of friends, going some neighbours or whatever it is, and meeting up once every month with a pint or something, and bashing ideas. Everyone's views are different. Every farmer's different, and that's the beauty of farming. So, bashing ideas around.
Yeah. Oh, we have another question here. The gentleman with the cap. Yep.
Thanks. Regenerative farming is a fairly loose term, and we're hearing today that it may be more of a journey than a destination. I just wonder how the panel thinks the definition should perhaps be tied down to stop accusations of greenwashing, but still retain the flexibility required, because it's at individual farm level that we've got to take the regenerative journey, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I did actually look up a definition from a Code of Practice report on regenerative agriculture, and it did say, it's all about restoring soil health, improving nutrient and water cycling, increasing biodiversity, carbon sequestration, increasing resilience to climate change, and increasing animal welfare. But overall, there's no list of exact methods or actions. Farmers take responsibility for deciding the best way to achieve desired outcomes and restore ecosystem health on their farm, which I thought was a good definition, but I'm happy for you to disagree with it as practitioners. Do you feel
it's
like it's
a long
good?
definition.
Yes, well, I'm a scientist.
Can you remember that off by heart?
No.
No, regen farming, for want of a better description, is fairly well laid out, and I'll need a bit of help from you guys to remember the 6 principles now of regen farming. First one is minimal soil disturbance, and that's chemical or cultivation or what have you. Second one is keep the soil covered. Third one is the integration of livestock. Fourth one is living roots. Fifth one, diversity. And then the 6th one, which I think Gabe Brown just added 18 odd months ago, is context, which is back to your point, Brian, about we can all do all of those things at different degrees, but what suits you and your farm will be different, and that's the context bit. And personally, I think if you're following as many of those guidelines as you can call yourself a regenerative farmer. I mean, ultimately with the goal of improving your soil and the natural environment within which you're working. Personally, I don't think it needs defined any more than that. I think that there's an awful lot of people getting their heads in a knot trying to define this thing, which is based on a set of principles. And yes, there's lots of calls from farmers who've been farming traditionally for many, many years, and they're saying, well, that's what we've always been doing. I wouldn't argue against that. It's quite right. There are many farmers who have been doing this, it just didn't get a fancy title.
Yeah. So as long as you're getting the benefits, it's like a journey that's just got to be led by what you're doing, really. Perhaps.
Yeah, I was involved with the British Ecological Society doing a report. They're doing a paper on regenerative agriculture now that's coming out quite soon. And chapter 2 was the definition of regenerative agriculture. And boy, oh boy, I was glad when that was over. Because that took most of the thing, and no one could agree no one could pin it down. So maybe it shouldn't, the term shouldn't be put in a box. Because once you put things in a box, it's prescriptive. And you've got to do it this way, and I think you should leave it up to the farmer, and it should remain as a fairly loose term, but guided by what David said, the principles, because there's nothing wrong with, I've farming without livestock for 30 years and part of the farm, under no-till and cover crops and things like that. The big missing thing in the equation, it really hit me a few years ago, was livestock and perennials in the rotation, and that all comes round to being a sort of a mixed farm at the end of the day, going back, and nothing is new at the end of the day. All our forefathers probably knew more about cover crops than we do, and use of them.
Yep. Oh, a question wherever the microphone is.
Here. Often further down south, quite a big thing down our way is Open Farm Sunday. I don't know whether that is a thing up here or not. But I think what we've been talking about explaining regenerative, or whatever label you want to give it. I think it's important that they explain to the general public, so that that gets it out much wider and is accepted much more. And so we don't need to put it into a little box. And we need to get it out much wider so as people understand what farmers are doing. I think that's what we need to get across.
Yeah, and I know Jeremy Clarkson did a good job of engaging people with farming. We need to get agriculture talked about more and educate our children. What other mechanisms, anyone think? What are we not doing that we should be doing? We're using YouTube, we're using social media.
Farmers could put a lot more, there's a lot of positive spin, but a lot of the press articles, like, for example, glyphosate, farmers are ruining the planet and they're polluting the planet and so on. But I think on the whole, we've got a rising population, we've got to feed everyone. Okay, I'm not saying that that's the raison d'etre purely for farmers, because they've got to, and it's becoming a lot more complex for farmers. They've got to be told to address the water pollution, they've been told to address carbon loss, they've been told to address biodiversity loss, and it's all our faults. But it's not our faults, really. We've been led down the route with the CAP policy in the 70s of going full-out production, and we're backing off from that a bit now. But food production, nutritious food production, is so important, and we can't expect the rest of the world all the time to feed us. Food security is an issue, but then it comes round to the whole complex argument is food provision of food or farming food or producing food a public good? I don't know whether it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think about the sustainable intensification kind of arguments, but I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But yeah, the future is we need to feed the growing population somehow. So.
But there's 30% of the food is wasted for a start.
Yeah.
So I mean, this can go down a whole number of rabbit holes if we really wish.
But yeah.
But I think we can. I don't think regenerative farming means less production. I don't think it means less output. It might mean different output, but I don't think it means less.
Yeah.
And as farmers around the world, every time we produce too much of something, we get paid less for it. Now we grumble about the cost of things and we're not making any money. The best thing we can all do is to produce less, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of getting away from the discussion here. I mean, the first thing the most important tool I have in my truck, really, from what we're trying to do at Balbirnie is basically a spade. That's the first thing you look at in the field. What state's the soil in? You can learn a lot by digging a hole in 5 minutes. It's good for you. It's a bit of exercise. And you can judge whether the water's getting away, whether there's not enough water in the soil, whether you've got a pan, or there's how many earthworms you've got or not. And you can learn an awful lot and make some really key decisions in 5 minutes, just with a spade. It doesn't have to be technology. It doesn't have to be a chemical. It doesn't have to be a seed dressing. It can be simple as that, and you can learn a lot. Even if you're a livestock farmer and you're not quite so interested in looking at the state of your soil, and I shouldn't really say that, but that's generally, even with us, I dig less holes in the grass fields than I do in the arable fields.
Why?
Well, I need to dig more. Because because we're mob grazing now, we've got longer routing, so we know the structure's getting better, so there's less issues there.
How do you know if you haven't dug?
Well, I have dug less holes.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah.
I didn't say no holes, I said less holes. Dig holes and see what's going on under the ground, and that can steer you very easily and very cheaply.
Yeah, and there are actually apps out there for assessing soil structure if you're too lazy to dig a hole yourself and look and use photographic keys to assess soil structure. But I think we had a question from you that we didn't ask, actually.
Yeah, sorry. I just, as a farmer who's just got rid of his cows, is there any way I can be regen?
I landed you in that one, too. Sorry. Get somebody else's cows or sheep. I mean, I think there's opportunities out there for land sharing. You know, we can all still be specialists. You know, you can be specialised in arable, specialised in livestock, specialised in fruit, vegetables, what have you. And we can bring other people's businesses onto our own businesses. Scale doesn't matter for that. And it offers an opportunity to bring stock onto an arable farm, get some free dung, some fertility building, some diversity in there, but not have the hassle if they get out at 10 o'clock at night or having to do things 7 days a week, etc., in the winter. So I think there's ways there. You just got to ask the right question and speak to people. So you don't need to go and buy any cows.
Okay.
But this, on the same question, we have fields that I wouldn't put livestock in for the same reason, that if they get out, geez, that's not good news. So maybe the way I think about it is the livestock underneath the soil. And they say there's a tonne per hectare, and you can put a tonne above the ground. So it's encouraging the livestock below the soil to really flourish. And whether that's using cover crops, treating the seed, using biological amendments or other amendments to really grow that. I can't remember Joe Williams or Frederick Thomas this summer talking about if you're growing a bad crop, you're not feeding that soil. You grow the best crops you can, one after the other, integrating cover crops and you know keeping the whole thing pumping all the time to really do that. So in some of my fields, that's definitely the way I think I have to do that. There won't be any cattle or sheep going into these fields, no.
Mm-hmm. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap things up, but I can see there were a lot of people with hands up that had more questions. So please do come and talk to our panel farmers and ask those questions, unless they want to escape. But I just want to give some key messages, I guess, so that we can end on a positive note. We know that we need to make use of communicating with farmer networks, education. Just use a spade, simple things to look at your soils. Hopefully we'll get a solution to the glyphosate problem. We're not there yet, but I'm sure that in time to come we're going to have solutions for some of these burning issues that we'll probably keep talking about for the next few years. But I just would like everybody to give the panel a round of applause. Thanks for their time.